We will get started this morning. If you was to text Aiden, would he see it before or after Sunday school?
Probably after.
Probably after.
Yeah, probably after.
Okay. Yeah, I meant to text him and forgot until just now.
Tell him about the phone.
Yeah, to make sure to announce it in Sunday school. But
Today's not Wednesday.
okay, I mean that's what I need to figure out. It is going to be the 8th. Do the King of Pins. No, it's not.
It is.
No, it ain't. No, it don't. Hush. Hush. So anyway, I did call and get some info. Believe it or not, I actually did that yesterday.
It's the thought that counts. I never had any is the real answer. I had 4 older ones. Okay, I never had these.
Oh man.
This is a lie. Well, that's not
So-
true. This is not a lie. I shouldn't say that.
So, like we said, I called, and of course, everybody has to rent their own shoe, but the cost is $5.75 a game, but we can rent a lane by the hour. And it's going to be about $30. So you have to rent the shoes to do the by lane.
I bought my own pair of shoes.
Brady, the questions and answers is after.
I don't know about that, man. I forgot to turn my phone off. Dang it. Oh well. So anyway, like I said, the lane rental's $30. I don't know how many people we would have show up. But time wise, I was kind of thinking maybe in the evening, more 5, 6 o'clock.
I work 5 to 2 on Saturdays,
So you would be free to be able to come. All right. So we'll do 5 o'clock.
The raindrop. Where's the
I'm thinking we'll just meet at Fountain Lanes, down in Fountain, the lower end of Fountain City.
That's where my siblings live now.
in the ghetto?
They don't live. They live near the.
They live behind the park.
Yeah, I was
In
saying
the ghetto?
No, not in the ghetto.
near the dog pound.
Now the bowling alley kind of is, but it's
Nice. I like it.
it's
I've actually been to that one. It isn't bad.
yeah, it's the one. It is down in Homelessville.
What is that in between the 5 and the fountain?
It's supposed to be at, okay?
That just looks like
It didn't turn out right, okay? Jeez, I get judged here. There we go. Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for the love. All right, so like I said, King of Pins will be June 8th at 5 o'clock at Fountain Lanes. And then when we get there, we'll figure out what we'll do, how we'll do once we see how many show up and all that, whether it be better to rent the lane by the hour or just play games. So,
Aiden has already been my friend.
oh yeah, he told me about
His wife
that.
or a friend?
No, a friend.
Brent? Brent?
Yes.
The lawyer dude?
Well,
I actually want to talk to him.
Actually, I don't know
That
if
sounds
it's
really
Brent's.
weird.
I just know it's one of Aiden's friends.
Yeah,
I
he
know
said
that
a
around
friend
that
of
time
his was coming
his
in.
best friend's coming in from law school. So.
Yeah. So, anyway, all right. So,
Is it Brent or Brett?
Brent.
Brett.
Although it really doesn't matter.
It kind of does.
Not immediately while we're trying to have Sunday school.
You know, jumping back into our study now, I had a guy that I work with, and if he watches this, he'll know exactly who he is because he watched last week's and told me Friday that we're too wordy. we're too talky. So as he said, as he put it. So I was like, well, some days it's like it, some days it's not. So anyway, somewhat it's kind of started off that way, yes. But anyway, we're still in our study in the book of Obadiah, talking about the transcending vision of Obadiah. We're talking about this really tough part of the vision. I imagine, as we said, I imagine it was hard it had to be hard for God to be looking at everything that's happened and reliving those episodes throughout time. It's also got to be tough to give the reasons why. I usually when you have kids, and I'm speaking from experience here, but usually when you have kids and you're having to get on to them and you're having to give reasons for getting on to them, and I'm sure you've experienced this in your all's lives. I experienced it in my life growing up. But the anytime we get in trouble, we always want to know why. That's always the question that comes immediately to everybody's mind first. And and a lot of times it's hard on mom and dad to give that, and I would imagine that the same kind of thing would be true here. That it's a difficult type situation that God is going through and reliving in this vision as He's telling it. I mean, I've heard, you've probably met people or seen people or know people who have had instances in their life that as they're recounting and retelling, they can tend to get emotional because of the difficulties of that. And I know I'm kind of reaching just a little bit, trying to put some humanistic emotions on God, but at the same time, difficult things are difficult. I know God can handle it and God can do it, but it's still, I would imagine, it's just a little bit difficult, a little bit hard, a little bit sad to have to go through and give out this, not because of He doesn't want to judge or do whatever He has to eat him. It's just the simple fact of having to relive everything that has happened to His people. So therefore, and then last week, we talked about in this tough vision, we talked about the violence that God's seen and how he chose to exact wrath of Himself through and on these people for the things that they did. We've seen the shame that fell on Obadiah, or not Obadiah, but Edom, for how God brought in about how He was going to cause the nation of Edom to fall. So now we're down to the visceral part of this vision in the visceral verse. And we'll see that in verse 11, where it says, "In the day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that the strangers carried away captive his forces, and foreigners entered into his gates and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou wast as one of them." So as we see, the visceral part, and if you can, if you're a student of the dictionary, or different types of words, visceral here, it really sounds bad, but it's really a word that is set in something that comes from within. It is, in other words, the deep hatred that the nation of Edom had towards the nation of Israel is what brought about, is the visceral part of this vision, just how they went about it. I mean, I kind of think about it this way: the disdain Edom had towards their brother Israel was one of the best, is best described as uncaring. When you're reading this verse, as we just did, in the day that thou stoodest on the other side, they just kind of stood there and watched everything that happened, almost as if they were cheering on the things that God was allowing to happen to the nation of Israel for their judgment. And then he says, in the days the strangers carried away captive his forces. So we see them, they're standing there and they're just taking all this in. It would kind of be like sitting at home watching TV of a football game or a basketball game or some type of sporting event. They just kind of was breaking out the popcorn and the sodas and just enjoying what they were seeing happen to someone that they had just a deep running disdain and hatred for. And God is saying, because of all of this, this is why judgment is coming your way. And then he talks about how the foreigners entered into the gates and cast lots upon Jerusalem as they divided up everything and took the nation of Israel captive. So as we see, when it comes to that, they were uncaring. They were emotionless. I mean, have you ever heard, I like, which my family knows, I like listening to true crime podcast. I like watching, the different things on TV that kind of go through how they solve mysteries and stuff like that. Not the kind of mysteries that Destiny's watching right now on TV and Scooby-Doo, but which is right down my alley too. I like Scooby-Doo. But, like I said, when it comes to that, I mean, as you're learning about how people can be and stuff, one of the things that I've noticed that happens a lot is when someone who survived something that happened to them, whether it was an attempt on their life or whatever, as they're reliving and recounting and telling the story of what happened to them, one of the things that oftentimes these victims bring back up is the fact that their attacker was emotionless. They were there, but it was like they weren't there. It was like, something inhumane was doing this to them. And that's kind of the way I envision when I'm thinking about this. That's kind of part of the way I envision Edom and how they just had such an emotionless, uncaring persona towards the nation of Israel. And it's really disturbing because, as if you really do get into a lot of just learning how sadistic and how out there the human mind can get if left unchecked, then you can kind of understand a little bit more about how emotionless this is, and how emotionless the deep running hatred that they had for Israel. I kind of think about this. I mean, if you go back to family, we can be at odds with family members. And this is two brother nations. Esau and Jacob, the two brothers in this story, and the nations that they became. This is family. This is a family thing. I mean, and I, usually when you see things happen in a family, I mean, a family could be at odds with one another. A brother and a sister could be at odds with each other. But typically, even when they're at odds, if somebody was to rise up against one or the other, generally speaking, there's going to be that family tie that comes in to where we will put aside that difference and we will come to the aid of that family member that is finding themselves to be under attack, whether it be, on social media, whether it be rumors or anything like that people are spreading and trying to disparage their character or something like that. A lot of times we will see how that will cause us to come to their defense, come to their aid type thing. That's what should have happened here in this when it comes to Edom and Israel. When things was going bad for Israel, Edom, being the older sibling, should have came to the aid of their brother. Yet they chose, as we said a few minutes ago, they chose to sit back on the sidelines and watch and break out the popcorn and eat popcorn while Israel is going through a very difficult and rough time as God was bringing judgment against them for the things that they had done wrong. But, like I said, it's almost as if Edom became a cheerleader. Now, we all know what a cheerleader is, or they usually stand down on the sidelines of a football game or at the end of the courts on a basketball game, and they cheer on their team that they're there to represent and try to fire the crowd up to get the crowd behind the team to try to, push them to victory. And that's kind of what Edom was doing as they're sitting back on the sidelines and just, as we've said, eating their popcorn and drinking their soda pop and all this, that, and the other. They're just sitting there watching, cheering on, encouraging the Babylonians as they came in and took Israel captive and the things, and they destroyed Israel. The different things that they had done. That's kind of deep. That's kind of sad, but unfortunately, that is something that happens. It's sad to see. I mean, especially when it comes to a family, they're going through a rough time, and one just has absolute, any care, don't care about what happens to a family member or anything like that. I mean, that's hard. And a lot of times you can see that even in a church. The church is not exempt, as we know. We kind of look to each other as being our church family. There's that inclusiveness. There's that camaraderie, that love that we have one for another. Then a lot of times, something will come up in someone's life, or somebody may have an ill feeling towards somebody else, even in the church, just as it can happen in a family. I mean, the church is not exempt, just as a family is not exempt. And that's the sad reality, and that's what's happening here. But the sad part, like I said, if you understand the word visceral, it means just something from deep within. It is just this deep rooted hatred, and hopefully that anytime something like that comes up in a family, hopefully it doesn't get to that depth. It doesn't get to that point to where it starts becoming an issue for the church. It doesn't come to the point to where it causes permanent separation from us and that loved one, that family member, or that person at church that we used to be close to and stuff, and everything. And it can get to there. If you want my opinion, I think a lot of times the problems that we see arise in the church, a lot of times the devil is trying to get an issue and a problem to that point to where it is just a blot in the church. It's something that everybody sees and everybody knows about, and he can kind of get in there and dig around and work and cause something bad to happen, just as in a family. I mean, if it gets deep enough, if that issue gets deep enough and it's not addressed, and amends are not made or whatever, and it gets to that point in a family, then you'll see that family never have anything to do with one another again. And that's a sad reality that we have as humans that we have to deal with. But it's still something that can happen, but it's still something that doesn't have to happen. God can step in and help in that, but we have to be willing. Here in this verse, Edom was unwilling. As we know, Esau was not a God-fearing man. He did not want to have anything to do with God, where Jacob was. Jacob had a heart for God. Esau did not. That was what defined both nations. So when it comes to God trying to work in Esau or Edom's lives to get them to care about somebody they had a deep rooted, I mean, it was almost to the point that it was too deep, and it really did get that way. We'll see how God handles that as we continue to look through this. But it got to that point. It got to the point that it was just so visceral and so deep rooted that there was almost no turning back. So here we see God responds to their lack of empathy by proclaiming them just as guilty. And we see that there in the last part of this verse. It says, even thou wast as one of them. So, like we've said, Esau or Edom did not actively partake a lot in the demise, the captivity, the judgment that God would bring against his people. They did not have any empathy. They cheered this on. They were just indifferent. And it got to the point that God said, even though you have this, you feel this way, I am looking at you, because as within a family, when it comes to the older sibling, generally we kind of look towards the male, the big brother, to be that one to rise up and come to the aid and the support of a younger family member. It can also go the other way. It can also be that big sister coming in and being there for that younger sibling. And that's kind of the way it should be. That's the way it's been. God kind of designed the family to be. I mean, he designed the family for the man to be the head of the house, to take care of his wife, to protect his wife and everything. And that's kind of the way that he set up the church. God is the head of the church. He's that person, and he takes care of us as long as we're willing to allow him to do that in our life. I mean, it comes down to a simple fact that when it gets down to even our children, even me, I'm the dad here. I can do whatever I can to be there for my kids, but it comes down to my kids having to make the decision that they are willing to accept that and allow me to be that driving part in their life. And if they reject it, there's nothing I can do about that. And that's kind of the way God is with his nation. They got to the point to where several times they just said, we're done. We want to do this. We're going to go over here. And what happened, they might have had a little joy for a season, but at some point in time, just as in this book, God is bringing judgment against them. It's not going to be, a lot of times if that child decides that they don't want to have anything to do with their parents and the provisions that their parents have supplied for them and is there for them, that support system, at some point in time, we do have to step out on our own. But that does not mean that we still cannot rely on our parents, on that support system. Just as when we step out in our own, we still have God there to help us. We can still rely on God to be there for us and to help us in this new phase of life as we move forward with Him. When we, get married and step out and go on our way, generally speaking, you're not going to have that opportunity to continue to live under mom and dad's roof, but you'll be stepping out on your own. It doesn't mean you might not need to for a little bit. I don't know. Everybody's different. But the one thing about all of this is that as God is the headship, and we have God in His rightful place, He'll be there to help us as we move forward in our life. And it doesn't mean, and there's going to be times, I've seen the judgment. I've seen God do things and work through my life for things that I should have done that I didn't do, and so forth, and just kind of growing cold and indifferent to Him and moving off into my own direction. I was still under the umbrella, but I'm far enough out there on the fringe of that umbrella to where I'm getting wet from the rain falling, the judgment falling and stuff. But as soon as I moved back under that umbrella and I put God in His rightful place in my life, things got better. I was able to see God's blessings come back into my life. And that's the way it is. And that's what could have happened here, but it didn't. This visceral attitude that the nation of Edom had towards their brother, they didn't care. They wanted to see the bad happen to Israel. And like we said here in this verse, God says, you're just as guilty as those who came in and took my people captive, that I allowed to come in and take captive. You're just as guilty as them. And He laid that to their charge. And so basically, in the eyes of God, even though they were not there to be the big brother, they were not there to be that family support system that they should have been, because they chose to withhold that and to make the things of Israel hard and difficult, and then find joy in the calamity that the nation of Israel is facing. God said, because you're that way, because you have gotten to that point. And I think that it took the nation of Edom getting to that point for God to say, that's it. As a pastor has so eloquently put it, that sin thermometer, and once you cross it, God says, that's it. No more. It was probably in this instance right here that we're reading about here that God said, that's it. He probably had hope that at some point in time they might have a change of heart, but they didn't. And they continued to just allow things to happen to the nation of Israel, even though God knew what those things were going to be. He knew what nation to rise up to drag them off into captivity for their judgment for the things that they did against God. It's just like a family. It's just like a kid. When we do things wrong and we do things that we know we're not supposed to, like when I was growing up, if I did something I was told not to do, I knew there was going to be a consequence. Just as many of us in here, when we were growing up, if we knew we crossed this point, then we knew mom and dad's going to get us. We're going to, there's going to be a whooping or whatever, mom and dad did. For me, it was a whooping. I got a whooping. I didn't get no time out. I got a whooping. And everything else. But it comes down to that point that I knew where my line. The nation of Edom didn't really know where that line was, but once they crossed it, God made them fully aware. You've done it. You've crossed it. That's the thing with us. The further we walk away from God, and once we cross that sin thermometer, we don't know what sin is going to be. I mean, do you know? Have you ever studied exactly what sin it is for a Christian to cross before God says that's it? I've said this time and time again. I go back to a cousin that I had back in the 80s. Said he was saved, did not live it, didn't go to church, had a profession of faith. That's it. That's all he had. He had no life, was big into drinking, doping, running around with women and everything else. And at some point in time, one faithful March morning, rainy morning, he was taking some videos back to the video store up in Blaine. And right in front of the stone house that still sits up there on the right as you're going towards Rutledge, car pulls up and stops in front of him. It's a 2-lane road at this time. And he pulls out, instead of going in the ditch, he pulls out to the left to go around it. And as soon as he pulls out into the left lane, a dump truck hits him head on, dead. Instantly. The only thing that I have hope of is that he crossed that sin thermometer. And it's not funny, but the way I said it was. But he crossed, as a Christian, he crossed that thermometer, and God said, that's it. You're not going to bring bad against my name any further. You've gone too far. This is it. And the only hope that I have, the only hope that my family has of seeing him in heaven, is the simple fact that as a 21-year-old man, 22-year-old man, that God took him out because of the life that he lived after proclaiming to be a Christian. And he had sinned so much since that time. As a free individual, a free man, can make his own decisions. He wasn't living under mom and dad. He'd done moved out. He was his own individual, his own person. And he's going out here and doing all the things that he was doing with people knowing who he was and knowing that he was supposedly a Christian, going out and living a life of sin and debauchery and all this, that, and other, to the point to where he crossed that sin thermometer. And God said, that's it. That's the only hope. And here in this verse, we see Edom crossing that line. They didn't know where it was. I don't know where mine is. But I do know, and I will testify of this, I do know that at one point in time in my life, I had gotten close enough to it to where the Holy Spirit said, this is it. This is your last chance. Just as he will do the same for us when it comes to our salvation. When we keep pushing him away and pushing him away and push, there will be that instance where he'll say, this is your last chance, just like he did Christy Davis upstairs. It's your last chance. You reject me this time, and I'm not going to have anything to do with you again. You're on your own for eternity, and you'll fall under God's judgment, and the Holy Spirit will leave when it comes to our salvation. And I think that's the same thing it is, as Pastor so eloquently put it, with that sin thermometer. Edom crossed it. We all have that opportunity to cross it. I would say be mindful not to cross it. Be mindful. Stay spiritual enough to where you can keep up with what's going on and what God is trying to tell you and trying to work and do in your life. That's the only way you can avoid having a visceral attitude, for lack of a better word, towards a family member, towards a church member, towards God. So, all right, that's all I've got this morning. Next week we'll be jumping in and talking about the vengeful aspect of this vision.